September 29th, 2011, Daisy Brown was in her California mountain home. She was cuddling her 14-month-old and nursing her brand new, tiny 3-week-old newborn. Early that morning, she heard what sounded like someone breaking into her home. And a few moments later, she was surrounded by armed police officers who violently stripped her children from her embrace and took them away. And when I was a new mom, nursing my own tiny baby, I heard an audio recording of that raid, and it devastated me. And when I found out it was over medical marijuana, legal in her state, and that it took her years to get her children back, I was destroyed, and I wanted to do something. Now, I may have been slightly hormonal or emotional, having just had a baby, but her desperate pleas to the police to bring back her babies haunted me, and I had to do something. And so I told my husband that I intended to become a pot activist, and he was not thrilled. But I started small, creating a space for women to get together and share their stories and perspectives, and then to support and empower each other, and ultimately it became a political platform for engaging in democracy, so that our voices, women's voices, became part of marijuana policy. And it turns out that the war on drugs, and specifically the prohibition of marijuana, is really bad for children. And it's really bad for families and communities and health and democracy. And now I work with a group of remarkable women who are dedicated to ending marijuana's prohibition. And we are a part of a larger network of mainstream, professional American women. And we believe that the costs of prohibition by far outweigh any consequences from marijuana's use. Now, women played an important role in bringing about alcohol prohibition, but you might not know that they also played an important role in ending alcohol prohibition. Women were disillusioned. Prohibition didn't work. It hadn't stopped anyone from drinking. It made hypocrites out of politicians and fueled crime, violence, and black markets. Youth had ever-increasing access. And so the women organized themselves, marching, speaking, writing, and ultimately holding their politicians accountable. And in 4 years, their organizations had spread like wildflowers across the United States, and prohibition was repealed. Youth drinking dropped by 50% right away. Well, some things never change. And we share the same concerns with prohibition that they did. And so we have modeled our organizations, in part, off of theirs. You see, you can't win a war on drugs. And the prohibition of marijuana has failed by every conceivable measure. It's failed on its own terms because despite ever-increasing, nearly limitless budgets and breathtakingly long sentences, usage hasn't gone down, abuse rates haven't changed, demand hasn't decreased, and it's failed in terms of human rights as well, because it's not just a few kingpins we're sending to jail. We arrest someone every 37 seconds for marijuana in this country, and our prisons are bursting. And this is bad for families and children because there is a direct trade-off between money for schools and money for prisons. California spends more on prisons than schools, more on prisoners than school children, and they're not alone. The war on drugs, and its largest component, the prohibition of marijuana, is bad for communities because it funnels military training and military weapons to our local police. We tell them they are fighting a war in our backyards. And just as with any war, there are tragic, innocent victims. It costs us $3.5 billion to enforce the marijuana laws, but that doesn't even begin to take in the tremendous costs of having someone absent from the home. Nearly 4 million children have a parent in jail right now. It's become so common that Sesame Street has children singing about it. And it's worse than all that. Marijuana's prohibition fails in terms of social justice as well, because it's not a cross-section of users who go to prison. It is demonstrably and drastically racist. African Americans make up 12% of marijuana users, but more than 70% of those doing time. By the age of 23, half of all African American males will have been arrested. And like all arrests, most are for nonviolent drug offenses, and most of those for small amounts of marijuana. In the toughest police communities, 1 in 3 people have a felony drug conviction, and a felony is a very deep hole to get out of. You'll probably lose your job, and it will be harder to get a new one. You'll probably lose where you live. It will be harder to find a new place. You'll lose your money for school, and in many states, you'll lose the right to vote. And it's forever. It never gets better. Prohibition hasn't just failed, it has backfired, just as it did under alcohol. Marijuana is cheaper and stronger, and children have been reporting for decades that it's easier to get than alcohol. We spend $1,000 a minute on pot in this country, and right now it's going to black markets and drug dealers who are only too happy to sell to our children. While Prohibition hasn't stopped anybody from using cannabis, nearly half the country tries it. It has virtually eliminated science and research. But it hasn't always been this way. Cannabis sativa is older than the political controversy that surrounds it now. There are words for it in dead languages. It's found in ancient burial sites around the world. And our bodies are lined with cannabis receptors. The plant produces over 100 cannabinoids that interact synergistically with those receptors, modulating mood, nausea, pain, inflammation, neurogenesis, and probably a lot more. The plant and humans share the same footprint on Earth. Surely the species have evolved together. And even in our own society, it hasn't always been so disfavored. Cannabis sativa came over with the settlers to Jamestown, Virginia. We wrote the Declaration of Independence on it. We made our money out of it. We paid our taxes with it. And it was widely available in drugstores and pharmacies for 100 years. Prohibition came in 2 waves of racist hysteria. The first, reefer madness in the 1930s, where a familiar medicine, cannabis, got a new name, marijuana, and with it a new and fictional identity as a dangerous drug, abused by African Americans and Hispanics, so dangerous that a single joint could send you into a murderous rage or cause your immediate death. Real prohibition came with Nixon. He declared it public enemy number 1, and his war on drugs was embodied in the Controlled Substances Act. That law classifies drugs into 5 categories. Marijuana is in the top, most restricted category, Schedule 1. It's defined as having no medical uses, a high potential for abuse, and to be so dangerous that it can't even be used under a doctor's supervision in a hospital. The law ranks marijuana alongside of PCP and heroin and considers it more dangerous than methamphetamines and cocaine. Marijuana was placed in Schedule 1 without any evidence it belongs there, and it has remained in Schedule 1 despite evidence it doesn't fit any of the criteria. Millions of people have used it for thousands of years with no fatalities. There is no lethal dose, and that makes it uniquely safe as a medicine. And it has a low potential for abuse because relatively few people develop dependence, and there is even a debate as to whether there are any physically addicting properties. But the medical research has been suppressed. Because marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug, multiple government agencies must approve its research. This includes the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the National Institutes of Drug Abuse. 2 agencies that statutorily see marijuana as a dangerous drug with no medical benefits. And so it won't surprise you that they rarely approve of medical research into the benefits. And this is a problem, because we have good evidence, mostly in research from other countries, which the DEA will not consider, and animal studies that suggest that cannabis and the cannabinoid system have important therapeutic and beneficial roles to play in some difficult to treat and awful diseases. I'm talking about Alzheimer's, autism, ALS, arthritis, diabetes, Crohn's, multiple sclerosis, post-traumatic stress disorder, cancer. And while I'm not saying marijuana is a panacea or a cure for any disease, I'm saying that prohibition censors the science, and we are left with a flat earth policy that is ruinously expensive, embarrassingly ineffective, racist, harmful, blocks information. Almost any approach would be better. And something better came in 2012, when Washington and Colorado voted to tax and regulate marijuana. I was the target demographic in both these campaigns. A woman, 25 to 45, probably a mother, probably not a cannabis user. In Washington, Allison Holcomb and her staff, made up almost entirely of women, wrote the law for soccer moms. It had safety built in and addressed all the sticking points. Tough on drug driving, strict underage penalties, no home grows, and taxes with funds earmarked for education and research. In the ads they ran, we see a professional woman around 40 who sits down at a coffee shop and says, "I'm not interested in pot, but I have serious concerns about prohibition, and it's time for a new approach." It worked. It passed. I voted for it, and I joined the campaign. And regulation is beginning to work. While it's still preliminary, we have the most information about Colorado. They have collected $35 million in taxes and fees. They've saved millions more by eliminating marijuana arrests and prosecutions. They've added 10,000 jobs. Violent crime is down. The murder rate is down by half in Denver. Prescription pain pill overdoses are down. Car accidents are down. And Colorado is the only state in the nation where teen use is decreasing. These are measures of success. Not how many people did we arrest, how many people did we send to prison, and that's how we measure it now. Regulation is working, but it's not working for everyone. In the states where it's legal, entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry don't have the same advantages as other American business. Because marijuana remains a Schedule I drug, they are forced into an all-cash business. No loans, no bank accounts, no credit cards, and everyone knows they're an all-cash business. No protection for their intellectual property, no business deductions, and at any moment, the federal government, or just some district attorney, can decide to enforce some irrational and unjust laws, and it would all disappear. And still, people are making it. And women are playing a big role. In Washington, the Marijuana Business Association's Women's Alliance is only 6 months old. It has 250 members, including over 100 small businesses owned by women. By some estimates, this is a $40 billion industry that's coming online. Women are first to the table, and they're leaning in. But it's still risky business, because people are losing their jobs for drug tests and drug arrests. Parents are losing their children, and some people, lots of people, are going to prison and losing everything. Child Protective Services is not prepared for responsible adult use. Without allegations of neglect or abuse, parents are losing their children for their mere status as marijuana patients or consumers. And it's stories like these, stories like Daisy Brown's that our organization collects, and they keep coming, and they are powerful. But they're not all sad. Mormon moms. You might be familiar with the apparent benefit that cannabis has on a rare and otherwise lethal form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. Parents of these children spend years in and out of hospitals giving their children mountains of drugs, the side effects of brain damage and organ failure. Don't work well to stop the seizures that keep coming, hundreds during the day and hundreds during the night. The children begin to lose their ability to walk and to talk and to grow, and then you're just hoping they're going to make it through the night. And as these stories go, these parents get sent home from the hospital for the last time, their children to die, Western medicine having utterly failed them. And as a last resort, as a Hail Mary Jane, they find that a few drops of non-psychoactive cannabis extract seemingly stops the seizures. These children find peace in their bodies and minds for the first time, and these parents get their children back. Women in Utah convinced their legislators to allow parents of children with epilepsy to treat them with these non-psychoactive cannabis extracts, and it sailed through the legislature. Who would have thought? Utah, my home state, progressive on marijuana? It's the women. And just like they did in Utah, they're organizing in all the other states that don't yet have medical marijuana laws on the books. And it's working. Because politicians are responding differently to arguments against prohibition when they come from women and parents advocating for their children and their families. Women are the game changers, and they are ending prohibition again. 33 states have medical marijuana laws on the books, or some form of liberalized marijuana laws, and fully 85% of Americans poll in favor of medical marijuana, making it the single most popular issue. And all the progress in the states and all the popular support is not enough to get the federal position to evolve. We have been stuck on flat earth with a policy that has failed. The last 40 years have seen the fastest paced medical advancements in history, and one of history's most therapeutic compounds has been left out. And we have been left without the information we need to make smart choices as policymakers, as physicians, as parents, and as a democracy. So I urge you to push past the stereotypes, free the research, free the science, and join me on the round earth.